Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today with me, the glorious Charles Coulombe.
Glorious. Wow. That's a lot to live up to.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
I mean, I think it's pretty easy for you to live up to glorious. He is a great Catholic historian and someone who has been very influential in my reading as well as in my podcasting. So he'll take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I don't know what to say to that, but I'll try to live up to it.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, let me see. I was born at an early age. I don't recall the event. No, I'm originally from New York. When I was 6, we moved to LA. I've lived there most of my life, with a few times out, 2 years in New Mexico going to college, 4 months in Connecticut, writing a book, things like that. And then 2 years ago, I moved to Austria to go to school, and that's where I am right now. About to begin my 3rd year here at the beautiful ITI in Trumau to get my master's in theology. And I've written 16 books, well, I guess 17 now, of which the latest is going to emerge in America this month, September the 23rd, being a life of Emperor Karl, Blessed Emperor Karl, the last emperor of Austria. And that's really about all I can say about myself.
You know, it's really incredible. I think that like the most recent book is on the last sort of European sort of grand king to sort of grace the stage. You know, I mean there are some princes and there are some other sort of less Catholic kings, but he was the last, and he was also arguably pretty, obviously pretty impressive.
He certainly was, and he was the last, one of the last, but certainly one of the best. And he's the sort of man. The more you study him, the more surprised you get at just what a decent fellow he was. I know that sounds funny when you say, well, I mean, he's a blessed of the church, he's a candidate for sainthood, and that, is obviously he was holy, but he also was humanly speaking, a very decent character. And Lord knows we don't see enough of those in public life anymore.
That's true. I mean, you're not going to get a blessed president.
No, that's something we can definitely not worry about having happen. So if anyone was fearful they might be called to Washington to testify for the sanctity of a president they lived under, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It won't happen.
I'm pretty sure anybody that testified on a president's behalf would just berate them, because there wouldn't be any. Because once you get past the point, every president is evil.
Well, let's put it this way: some were less evil than others. When people ask me about it, I always say that President Reagan, of all the presidents I've lived under, Reagan was my favorite, the best, but that's like calling him the tallest pygmy. It's not much of a compliment considering what the other presidents I lived under were like.
Yeah, it's true. Is it true that Washington is the only one that is known to have converted on his deathbed?
Yeah, there's some hope for John F. Kennedy, but not that much.
Yeah, wouldn't hold your breath there.
Yeah, but no, it's not from the Catholic point of view, the history of our country has a few bright lights, but not all that many. And, part of the problem was that almost at the beginning, we were given the chance to evangelize after independence of the Constitution. But for the most part, we chose respectability instead of evangelization. And so we got one of our own in the White House, President Kennedy himself, elected the very day I was born. It's true.
Yeah. It's interesting just because your book, Star Spangled Crown, puts much better, or it makes me think much more highly of our country in a sense.
Well, that was actually one of my intentions. I mean, I had three intentions really in writing Star Spangled Crown. And they actually were not too terribly closely connected, to be honest with you. On the one hand, a friend of mine, Christophe Bouffin-de-Chazal, wrote a book called The End of Democracy, which is also published by Tumblr House, the English version. I read it, before it was published. And when we were talking about these sorts of things, he pointed out to me that there are many European Catholic monarchisms, but not really a single body of Catholic monarchist thought in Europe because of the many national differences. And yet, an American who looks at them can see the resemblances, although there are very few Americans who would study them seriously. Carlism in Spain, Miguelism in Portugal, French legitimism, and on and on and on through the continent. But I have, and I did see them. I did see the resemblances. And so one of the things I set out to do in the book was to talk about the ideal of Catholic monarchy independent of existing nationalisms. And of course, you can see why basically constructing one in the United States made that easy to do. But I had another and very different goal in writing the book. Part of the problem for our country and with our country right now is that it's very often been seen as an ideology rather than a country. The American dream, etc., as opposed to America. And I've heard people actually go so far as to say things like, well, if America doesn't live up to its own principles, it's no good. Well, all right, I don't know how to break the news to everyone, but countries per se don't really have principles. The people who inhabit them may. One hopes they do. But a country is a country. And to expect it to be more, to expect the kind of perfection out of your country that you can't expect out of, even yourself, is a bit much. And yet this identification of the American ideology with the American country opened up the terrible danger that if people cease to believe in the American ideology, they would cease to love and believe in their country. Now, if you stop for a minute, French monarchists, Spanish monarchists, Portuguese, all these guys, Italian, Austrian, and the other Central Europeans, for the most part, the regimes they favor have been out of power for a long time. And yet, generally speaking, they are the greatest patriots to be found in their countries, because their love of their country is not bound up with its government the way we Americans have been taught to be. So one of the other things I was trying to do with the book was some efforts toward the reconstruction of a patriotism that's based on the country itself and not on an ideology that fewer and fewer people believe. So the identity of America itself is one of the things I was really looking at, and why we should love it for itself and not because it's the last great hope of mankind, the shining city on the hill, all that good stuff. Because what if it isn't? If it's not the shining city on the hill, if it's not the best hope of mankind, if American exceptionalism, so-called, isn't true, what's left? And the answer is a whole lot. A whole lot. Because it's the country, number one, that you and I and a lot of other people were born in, to which our ancestors came, driven by ill winds or good, very often ill. The country where most of us have done pretty well, and the country that from all eternity God saw fit to put us in, whether we were born in it or emigrated there. So that's the country that we're given to love. And it's a country that's done some pretty neat things. And I'm not talking about the great crusades against communism and fascism. I'm talking about the country that invented the polio vaccine and the cocktail. The country that gave us the Broadway musical and the golden age of Hollywood. I mean, we might not have produced great art, we produced pretty good art. And an awful lot of the things that make the world more comfortable, if not wiser or better, we produced. And there's something in that. That's something to be proud of. We didn't do Leonardo da Vinci, God knows, but Norman Rockwell's not bad. we didn't do Mozart, but we did Irving Berlin. And again, it may not be the very, very highest kind of high culture, but it's all right. It's okay.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I think it would be good for all the viewers or listeners that aren't necessarily on board with monarchy. I think it'd be good if you gave sort of your reasons for being a monarchist.
All right, well, that's a fair question. Basically, I enjoy being ridiculed and attacked at every turn. Sorry, that wasn't it. Although it has happened, and sometimes I wonder if I've gotten a taste for it. I haven't. No, well, why am I a monarchist? Well, firstly, I can answer that with in two different ways, and I will. I can say that most American monarchists, and it is a small but growing tribe, tend to fall into one of four categories. The first are, for want of a better term, philosophical monarchists. That is to say, people who, for whatever reason, have come to believe, objectively speaking, without loyalty to a given dynasty or a given form of monarchy, that it's the best form of government. You know, these are some of your Burke and de Maistre fans, Aristotelians, Thomas, and lots of other people like that. So as I say, you would call them philosophical or theoretical monarchists. The second are what I would have to call religious monarchists. And these are folk who feel that monarchy is the best form of government in terms of their religion. And they might be Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican, Lutheran, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist. You'll find all sorts of monarchists in those faiths. The third are emigres and or their descendants. That is to say, people whose ancestors or whom themselves came from a given monarchy and have retained a certain loyalty to the ruling house of their ancestors themselves. And lastly, there are the Anglophiles. And these range from people who really think the British system is the best to those who really love their Queen Mother commemorative plates and just adore Downton Abbey. There's a huge range in between those two extremes. For myself, I would say that I'm the first three. I'm not that much of an Anglophile, though I enjoy going there. I have a lot of friends in England. But and that leads me to segue into the second, which is precisely what kind of monarchy I favor, because there are all kinds. I mean, just like there are all sorts of republics. Hitler's Germany was a republic. We have a republic. We had a republic in 1950. We had a very different republic in 1850. Uganda had a republic. One of the jokes when I was young was that in those days everyone claimed democracy. So the joke was that in America, we had representative democracy. In the Soviet Union, they had people's democracy. And Idi Amin called cannibalism nutritional democracy. So, so if you love democracy, you can always find a way to fit yourself into it. But for myself, I prefer, and this is, by the way, with a couple of caveats, there are a lot of monarchies I would not care to live under, like the Ottoman Sultan or the Chinese emperor. But even in those cases, they were never replaced by anything better. We tend to forget that. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to live under the Ottoman Sultan, but I surely would not want to live under Kemal Atatürk. So, the second thing to bear in mind also is that there are two kinds of monarchy in the Christian world that I'm not what you would call really a fan of. Okay, you're frozen on me. Are we back?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, you froze on me.
You left off with Christian monarchy. Oh wait. No. Am I frozen?
All right, let me know when you're ready, and I'll start yapping again.
You're not moving, so I don't know if it's second. Oh, here you go. Now you can go. Now you're all
right. All right. So there are two sorts of Christian monarchy that I'm not wild about, but nevertheless have their benefits. The one is what people are pleased to call absolute monarchy. And I say pleased to call because usually they'll cite Henry VIII as an example of tyranny and blah, blah, blah. But what they forget is that they themselves live under a regime that is far more absolute than Henry VIII could dream of being. He broke the union with Rome. He killed a lot of his wives, but he couldn't change the nature of marriage. And he couldn't redefine what is a human being. And that our absolute regime has done. So don't talk about the tyranny of absolute monarchy until you're willing to admit that you yourself live under a tyranny. And if you're not willing to admit that, that's okay, but don't throw stones. If you live in a glass house, don't do that. Bad form. And then the second form of monarchy that I'm, again, not that keen about is the constitutional monarchies that we see today in Britain and Spain and Belgium and so on, where the king or the queen reigns but does not rule. Now, don't get me wrong, they have certain benefits. And again, any republic that would replace the monarchy in Britain or Canada or Belgium or Spain would be much worse than the current arrangement. No doubt about that. Nevertheless, it's not to me the optimum. So, what is the optimum? Glad I asked that question. To me, the optimum version of monarchy is, of Christian monarchy today, is this updated version of the pre-absolutism. In other words, something in a lot of ways actually resembling what we have in the United States. And that's ironic until you realize how much of medieval thought went into the Constitution. They couldn't bring themselves to have a king, however, which I think would have made it much more effective. But basically, I told you earlier that I'd looked at all these different sorts of Catholic European monarchisms and come up with their commonalities. Well, here they are. There are 5 of them. The first is the altar. That means the place of the church in society as the dominating, as the animating philosophy for society, the body which makes the rules, if you will, gives legitimacy, gives authority. And this is a very important concept, by the way, to get across. And that is the difference between authority and power. Authority is the right to say what ought to be done. Power is the ability to make it happen. Your doctor has the authority to tell you to start drinking red wine for your heart's sake, but he doesn't have the power to make you do it. Only you do. So, having said all of that, the church then derives her authority from God and passes it on to the king and the state via things like the coronation rite and so on. So that's the first part, the altar. The second is the throne, the king himself. And there you would see a figure very much in a lot of ways like our own presidency, only hereditary, responsible for foreign and military policy, not so much for domestic, although the king being the king, everything's done in his name. Traditionally, in Europe, in European monarchies, before the rise of absolutism in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, things were very decentralized. You had the third point, local liberties, provincial rights, or what we would call today subsidiarity. That is the idea that the lowest possible element of government should be the one to do the most possible to it. Should only, in other words, all things it can do, it should do, and only things it can't do should go up to the province, or from the province to the country. One of the things about medieval monarchy was that authority, as I've described it, was concentrated in the church and the king. But power, that was very diffuse. The church had some, the nobles had some, the cities had some, the guilds had some, the peasants had some, and so forth. So that a good king was like an orchestra leader. His job was to make the different elements of power work together for the common good. When you had a bad king, you didn't have a tyrant, although he could make life unpleasant for those immediately around him. What you had was anarchy.
What was the last part? Sorry.
I say, when you had a bad king, is that where we cut off? When you had a bad king,
Yeah.
although he could make life unpleasant for those immediately around him, you didn't get tyranny, you got anarchy. And that was the problem with the medieval state. Now with us, of course, it's reversed. Power is concentrated and authority is diffuse amongst the electorate. So it doesn't really mean much. Well, at any rate, those three. The fourth point is, for want of a better word, class collaboration. It's been called solidarism, corporatism, guild socialism, distributism, all for people looking at different aspects of it. What it comes down to is what we call today solidarity. Social solidarity, unity among the classes, again, for the common good. And lastly, but not leastly, the fifth point is the consciousness of being part of a greater whole, of Christendom, of what's that?
Of being something in Christendom.
Yeah, the Holy Empire, Abendland, the Occident, call it what you like, as opposed to the EU or the UN. Although I must say that I've often thought that one of the reasons why the popes since World War II have been so fond of the UN and the EU is a sort of unconscious yearning for that very concept. But at any rate, those are what I consider the five basic points of Catholic monarchy. And in my book, Star-Spangled Crown, I attempt to see what would happen if someone applied them to our country.
Yeah.
And you know, I wrestled for a long time with just how to do that. Because, you know, Coulombe talking about monarchy and why it's a good idea, both strikes me as a little dull. And after all, who am I? But then I thought, what I could do is imagine that it's already happened and simply describe how it works. And that way it would be, depending on how you feel about these things, it's either a dystopian or a utopian novel. You have to decide for yourself. I'm not going to. But what I did do, I think my best to do was not to make it too utopian, in the sense that everything isn't wonderful, and the author isn't omniscient by any stretch. I had a lot of fun creating him because he's an as yet non-existent great nephew of mine, and he's writing in the future when he's an old man, and I myself play a part in the early part of the book, and I'm very old, you say. So the time.
Your part is very entertaining. The part you play.
Yeah, well, I had to figure out what kind of an annoying old cuss I'd be in 30 years, and I could imagine myself doing what I did in the novel. You can't expect me to leave my books behind. What are you, crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, I tend that way now.
Yeah, refusing to leave a dangerous zone just to keep your books.
Well, you see, I tend that way now. I could imagine being completely that way when I'm, on the verge of senility. Because
I mean, also, it's also like everyone knows that something dramatic is gonna happen, is happening or whatever, and you know if it's gonna happen. It's hard to know.
Well, it's true, and of course, since I wrote the book, a lot of, people have called it prophetic. I wish it were, at least as far as the nice outcome. The unpleasant bits, unfortunately, do seem to be coming true in front of our eyes, which I have to say I didn't see in the tarot cards, the crystal ball, and the tea leaves, but I do know history and I know people. And I knew back when I was writing the thing in 2015 that I knew the election, I figured Trump would win, but I also knew that whoever won, it was going to be unpleasant for a large part of the population. And that's why, you remember, I opened it with the election of 2016 turned out as badly as everyone feared. I'd never say who won, because of course I wrote it before the election, so I had no idea. And it didn't matter. Just as with this election that's coming up, I suppose my best guess, and I could be wrong, we'll find out, but my guess is that Mr. Trump will win. And the Republicans may very well get the House back. But if that's the case, they'll find they're dealing with a lot of sore losers. On the other hand, if Harris is elected president, then there'll be the blowback that I already felt in the last couple of years of Obama, but was sort of quieted by Mr. Trump's election. That blowback will come a lot sooner. The problem is we've gotten to the point in the United States where everyone lives in one of two worlds, which is madness, but it's the way it is. And the one side keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And they don't realize what they're waking up. So I'll make another prediction, which I hope I'm proved completely wrong. I'm turning 60 this year. I hope that if I live to see my 70th, and we can talk about this in 10 years, I hope we can laugh at how stupid I was and how wrong I was. And here it is. If either if Mrs. Harris is elected or Mr. Trump is elected, but in 4 years' time is unable to come up with a successor who's able to win, then in 4 years' time, there'll be a terrible, terrible blowback to everything that's going on. And out of the ensuing chaos, we'll get a strong man. And I don't know what that strong man will be like because I can't tell. His person is, it'll all be a matter of his personality, to the degree that he's smart, to the degree that he's stupid, the degree that he's sane, the degree that he's insane, the degree that he's good, the degree that he's evil. You know, it might be Franco, it might be Stalin. There's no way to know. I suspect that whatever he's really like, he'll wrap himself in the flag and he'll lift the cross. But I doubt the cross will have a corpus on it. So that's my best guess. I hope I'm wrong.
Me too. But I want, one of the things I want to talk about is like the actual book world. I found it, I found the story part specifically very fascinating, and it would be really interesting if you were able to actually tell sort of a novel or involving it. I think it would be very entertaining.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was fun to write, and I got a lot of I laughed a lot while I was doing it. Frankly, the novelesque part, the setup, if you will. I mean, basically, I had to get the monarchy in there somehow. So the question is, how did it happen? Well, Deus ex machina. I needed a monarchy, and a monarchy was provided. It's that simple. Or actually, I needed a monarch, because the biggest part of the book is about how the monarchy was constructed afterwards. But the first part, which, as I say, I had a lot of laughs. I mean, the idea of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sitting around trying to figure out what to do to create a civilian government that wouldn't execute them once they surrendered power to it. I mean, you're talking about the tiger by the tail. And then, of course, the
crazy president.
Yeah. And then the professor, the former professor of history at West Point saying, "Oh, how about a monarchy?" Everyone laughs. Anybody have a better idea? And that, of course, is on his monument at Arlington. Because, the funny thing is, in real life, in history, that is the way things sometimes tend to go. And of course, the gangbanger becoming eventually a field marshal in the Royal Army. I had fun with that, but I was reminded of it again by a friend who sent me a a video online that had been on the internet of a bunch of Crips chasing Antifa out of Long Beach. And and the friend who sent it to me said, "Well, I guess this must be your field marshal." And I tell you, I was very proud of the Crips that day.
Well, yeah, I think there's a Chicago gang who has been doing kind of the same thing.
Yeah, the Latin King. So I've heard. The word gets to me even over the sea. We live in a truly globalized environment. But I had fun. I had fun with that part. There's no doubt about it. And it was interesting too. A lot of the scenes were things that actually happened in real life, simply transposed. So the scene, for instance, where the youngest son of the king is killed in the fighting in Liberia, and they got this weepy scene in front of the White House. That actually happened when the Duke of Kent was killed in World War II. And it's happened at other times and places when the royal prince has been killed in combat. And when that occurs, people's personal tragedies, of which there are many in wartime, all get caught up in the tragedy of the royal family. And that, of course, is one of the things that a royal or an imperial family do. They, in a certain sense, they take on themselves the sufferings and the joys of their nation. Franz Joseph, it's interesting, today that we're doing this is the anniversary of the murder of Empress Elizabeth in 1898, Franz Joseph's consort. Now, he had a really, really rough go of it at Franz Joseph, because His brother was murdered by Juarez in 1867, the Emperor of Mexico, Maximilian. His son was either murdered or committed suicide in 1888, 87, whatever it was, Crown Prince Rudolph. His wife is murdered in 1898. And then finally in 1914, his nephew is assassinated in Sarajevo. So not surprisingly, as the years went by, his people identified very closely with him and they revered him because despite all the tragedies in his life, he just kept at it. And he used to call himself the first civil servant of the state.
So it's also kind of depressing that that's literally
I'm
God.
sorry?
It's what God led Blessed Emperor Karl to be emperor.
Yeah.
Those events, needed to happen, pretty much, except for his wife being assassinated. That didn't need to happen, but the other parts need to happen.
Well, again, God brings good out of evil, but I can tell you that the loss of Franz Ferdinand was a great loss, not just for Austria, but for the world. And I don't simply mean because it touched off World War I. As a man, he was very devout, very devoted to the Sacred Heart, Franz Ferdinand, I mean. In many ways, Emperor Karl modeled himself after him. Certainly they had the same political views about the need to reorganize the empire and the need to expand their alliances beyond Germany. One of the things I discovered in this, that I wrote about in the book that's coming out, I had no idea. Well, basically I was trying to find out from Google the various gifts that Franz Ferdinand had given different parishes. Well, up comes a parish in the middle of nowhere in Buckinghamshire, in England, a Catholic parish. And it said that in 1912 or 1913, whenever it was, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, his wife, had gone to Mass there several times. Well, I thought, why would they do that? Why would they go to Mass in the middle of nowhere in England? Well, it turned out that they were part of a hunting party at the estate, nearby estate of a nobleman. That was the closest Catholic church. But also present were all the leaders of the then out-of-power Tory party. And it struck me, because Franz Ferdinand was very much one for conducting his own foreign policy, that had he survived to become emperor, and there not been a World War I, there's a good chance, once the conservatives were back in power, that Austria would have allied with England. And he had a very good relationship with Russia as well. So that would certainly have kept Germany and France quiet.
The really interesting thing, sort of, I think in the book was sort of the Concordat of Bari.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
One of the interesting things I thought about in the book was the Concordat of Bari, I think it's called.
Oh, the Concordat of Bari, yeah, you bet.
And as well as what ended up happening. I can't remember if the Habsburgs became emperors again, or did they pass that off, or what happened there?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what happened. You ended up with restorations both in Russia and Austria. And the, shall we say, gentle pressure of both, plus the, shall we say, new leadership in Rome and Constantinople brought about a rapprochement between the Orthodox and the Catholics. And the Concordat was signed at Bari simply because that's where St. Nicholas, who's very, very beloved by both, is enshrined. One of the other things that was going on at that time was a resurgent Islam. And so in the face of it, the Romanovs and the Habsburgs felt the need to combine their forces as much as possible. And of course, in the end, they also secured Israel by basically taking it over, a new Latin kingdom, if you will.
Was the Holy Roman Empire reinstated, or would it be just an Austrian empire?
That's a good question, and the answer is it was definitely, it had not yet been reinstated, but things were definitely going in that direction.
Gotcha. Okay. Also, interesting enough, I've noticed some people sort of looking back now to World War One. People like people sort of non-traditional or non-Catholic, or even just sort of mainstream people looking back at World War One and like being like, why was the United States even a part of this war? And sort of questioning the Atlantic's narrative that pushed the United States into war. Also, interesting enough, a professor president, Woodrow Wilson, getting us in there.
Well, it's very true. And what's ironic about it is that he campaigned in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," which, the next year he led us into war. There were several things at play. One is that after the war broke out, the United States lent a lot of money to Britain and to other countries. And the financial center of the world shifted from the city of London to Wall Street, where it's been ever since. And in that year, the United States went from being a debtor country to being a creditor country. We've been in debt to foreign powers ever since independence until 1915. Wilson wanted to get into the war basically to redraw the map of Europe, to do what he did, to advance his own particular ideology. He believed in democracy, as many Americans do, and believed, as many Americans do, that it needs to be enforced wherever it's lacking. The old joke, sometimes you have to destroy a village in order to save it. Well, this has been a motif, shall we say, that's haunted American foreign policy for both parties, really since 1898 and before. But at any rate, Wilson wanted to get into the war very badly. The Germans gave him an excuse in terms of American emotions when they began unrestricted submarine warfare, which, by the way, Kaiser Karl warned them against. He said, "Don't do it; it'll bring the States in." But of course, he was only a kid in his 20s, and he didn't know anything. He wasn't smart, not like us old people who know everything and make the world so good because we know stuff. All right, well, maybe we don't know that much. Anyway, so the casus belli, the cause of war with Germany, was the so-called Zimmermann telegram, which purported to be a telegram from the Foreign Office in Berlin to their embassy in Mexico, encouraging the Mexicans to attack the United States and offering them the American Southwest if they would do so. Now, there's one itsy bitsy what's the problem with that. And the what's the problem is that Mexico was in the middle of a very bad civil war at the time and was not going to be attacking anybody.
Is that the Cristeros?
No, it was the Civil War that ended up as the prequel to the Cristeros. The government that triumphed in that Civil War by 1920 were the government that persecuted the church, and as a result, why we had the Cristero Rising. But so it was connected, but it wasn't the same conflict. Well, Mexico was not in a position to do anything to anybody. And there is some evidence that the telegram was a forgery. But forgery or not, that was the very, very iffy evidence that Wilson used to get into the war. But he did not declare war on Austria. That didn't come until later in 1917. The reason was that the Italian front was collapsing. The Austrians did very well. They overwhelmed the Italians at the Battle of Caporetto. They're just surging south. So Wilson wanted to rush American troops there as fast as possible to shore up the Italian lines. But there was one little problem with doing that. When you're a neutral, you can't rush troops in. Neutral powers can't do that. Well, I mean, sometimes they do, but you're really not supposed to. So what happened? Well, we've learned since how to do these things, and we have rushed troops into areas that perhaps we shouldn't have, but never mind. So what should happen but that they found the passengers of a ship that had been torpedoed by a U-boat in the Mediterranean, and they were rescued by the U-boat, of course, and set off on a neutral port. But they appeared in Washington to testify that the ship had been torpedoed by an Austrian submarine. So the question was, how do you know it was Austrian? And the answer was, oh, they spoke Austrian.
Just German?
Yeah. But see, when you want what you want, you get what you want. Yeah, it's just German, but they heard Austrian. And so that's how they knew, and that was why the United States declared war on Austria-Hungary. So that allowed us to rush troops and keep the Italians from collapsing. And then it gave Wilson the chance to dictate the peace, which he did. And in getting rid of the Habsburgs and the Hohenzollerns and the Wittelsbachs and all the rest, as no less than Winston Churchill, who you can hardly call pro-German, said, he paved the way for Hitler and then for the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain.
I have an interesting question since you're in Austria. What would Austrians, or do Austrians consider themselves also German, or is it now not? Is that kind of considered bad?
Oh no, they're Austrian. They are not German by any stretch. And the thing is, it's ironic, but now, especially since communism has been gone for 20 years, the continuing ties culturally and spiritually and everything else with the rest of the former empire become ever more apparent. I mean, Bavaria resembles Austria somewhat, but the rest of Germany really doesn't.
Yeah.
You go to Hungary, you go to Czechia, Slovakia, even to areas in Poland and Ukraine and Romania that have been part of the empire. And you know, it's got very much the same feeling. If it weren't for the differences in languages, you would think you were in the same country.
Ethnically speaking, you'd consider Austrians, or ethnically Austrians are still German, just not culturally anymore. Is that kind of the overview?
Well, yes, but they're very, how do I put it? They're very mixed. They have a lot. I mean, you go to the phone book in Vienna in particular, and there are lots of Czech names, Hungarian names. They're very, very mixed that way. Also, in the far south of the country, Carinthia, there are a lot of Slovenes. And the easternmost portion, the easternmost state, Burgenland, which was actually part of Hungary until 1919. Burgenland has not just Austrians, but a lot of Croats and Magyars, Hungarians. So it's a bit more ethnically diverse than you would think. And I mean, the German is different from German. And the way of life is very different. The people are very different. I mean, it's funny, my best friend lives in Germany. I was just up there. He's a German from Aachen. I was just there last week. And once again, it hit me just how different the Germans are from the Austrians. The Austrians consider the Germans very pushy and, you know, rough. And the Germans consider the Austrians sort of lazy and laid back and all this. And they kind of resent them too. In various ways, because the Austrians consider themselves superior to the Germans in a lot of ways.
Is that more of a sort of a not the superior thing, but the sort of more relaxedness, the less sort of I don't know what you consider the Germans, but sort of, is that more sort of Catholic related because they have more ties to sort of other Catholic countries versus sort of the Protestant culture that formed
that is a big part of it, and that's one reason why again, they do have a good deal in common with the Bavarians, who are also Catholic, but with the Prussians and the other North Germans, not a lot. Even during World War One, when they were allies, they called them the Saupreußen, which means sow Prussians. Sow being a female pig. It's not really a term of respect.
Yeah.
So mind you, there were always an element, the so-called pan-Germans, that wanted to unite with Germany. But even that was kind of a response to Pan-Slavism and to Hungarian nationalism.
Gotcha. It's interesting. Just I do have some family that came from Austria-Hungary before World War One.
Oh, what do you know where?
Not entirely. I just know the usually I know the last name, but I can't remember.
No, sorry, don't bother you.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting. I also have a lot of Germans from, or a lot of Germans. Well, like from Oberweis, and I even noticed. I think I have a Prussian in my bloodline, and some from Alsace-Lorraine. I'm not sure if they were French or if they were German, really, but it's kind of a mix. So, and then my other side's Irish, which is.
I was going to say Connor McHugh. That's definitely a Swedish name right there.
I actually learned something really interesting about one of my families, or one of the families that make up my background, is that there was this family named the McCulloughs, and
McCullough.
Yeah, McCullough. They were a baronet in Scotland, and so that there was this family rivalry between the Gordons, I think that's what it was, and the patriarch of the family shot one of the Gordons in the leg, and then the Gordon died, and then he was executed for murder, and then everyone fled to America.
Well, you see, that's the story of America. Inevitably, you'll hear stories of some dreadful occurrence anywhere from Portugal to Russia, and then the family left for America. Is the way it always ends up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it any wonder that we're a country of malcontents and no counts?
Yeah. Also, there's sort of the legend of the McCulloughs is that they were descendants of some Irish king that like Scotland for something, and some people stayed.
Probably Niall of the Nine Hostages. Well, I mention it because they were from the islands, the Highlands. A lot of the Scots clans were closely connected to the Irish, and the King of Ulster, back in a long time ago, was Niall of the Nine Hostages. And it seems, I mean, what Scots blood I have is McKinnon from the Isle of Eigg, which is just south of Skye. And they claim their descent, just like everybody else in the islands, from Niall of the Nine Hostages. So it's most of the Highland and Island clans claim that. And who knows, it may well be true. I mean, we tend to forget that we all descend from a relatively small number of people.
Yeah. It's also fun to sort of think about that, that my family had a castle in Scotland, prior, and they were given what they had by, I think, Charles I, which is kind of funny. Also, not necessarily unfortunately, but I'm a little mixed on my feelings about this. I think I have 4 American revolutionary soldiers in my family.
Well, remember, the trick in history is never to personalize it. I mean,
Sure.
where I often enough when I've given a lecture about World War I, say, and I've said that our intervention was disastrous, inevitably somebody will come up with, well, my grandfather or great grandfather got the Congressional Medal of Honor, they are gone. Bully for your great grandfather. I'm sure he was terribly brave. God bless him. That's not the point. I mean, my dad was a tail gunner in the war against Japan, 12 successful missions. That doesn't mean I have to subscribe to Roosevelt's reasons in pushing Japan to get into the war.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and of course, my father, oddly enough, he, although he had more than a few scrapes with the Japanese, he was a tail gunner. And as a rule, they didn't last long in combat. So he had to have his wits about him. You know, that little glass ball at the end of the bomber. He'd be there with a machine gun and looking out over endless ocean. But he liked the Japanese, you know, which he hadn't known anything about them before he fought them, but he came to like them. And, you know, it's again, any individual who lives in a great historic conflict, you can either blame them or praise them for being in it, simply for the job they do.
Yeah. It's definitely just interesting that sort of my one side of my family, well, sort of the McHugh side sort of just came here relatively recently, like in the early 1900s.
From when? I'm sorry?
My McHugh side came recently in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And they're actually, them and another, I think, family came over, and they're the ones where sort of the Catholic element comes from. And then actually, then I think my German side is actually had been sort of Catholic a lot longer, which is kind of interesting. It's yeah, so.
Well, you see, it's that's the point I always make. History is not simply some topic. It's each of us who we are. It's what is where we are, who we are, how we are, why we are.
Yeah.
Would you believe my internet connection is unstable?
Mine probably is too.
I just saw a sign flash across the screen.
Yeah. Well, anyway. I think we should probably wrap up the episode. Thank you, Mr. Coulombe, for coming on here. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think you lived up to the glorious element. I look forward to having you, or not having you. I look forward to reading your next book, and maybe we can do this another time with the Blessed Emperor Charles book.
I'd be very happy to do that. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yep. Thank you for listening, everyone. And please like, share, and subscribe. And you can find Charles's books on Tumblr House. And you should also watch Off the Menu. It's a great podcast run by Tumblr House. So thank you, everyone. Bye.